The place was always loud at this hour. People walked in and out without stopping, their footsteps mixing with low conversations, phone sounds, and the distant noise of traffic outside. In the center of the hall stood a piano. It was polished, black, and beautiful, but most days it was ignored. People passed it like it was just another piece of furniture. Some glanced at it, some leaned nearby, but very few ever touched it. That afternoon was no different. The crowd moved fast, everyone busy with their own lives. Some were tired after long days, others were in a hurry to be somewhere else. No one was really looking for a moment to pause. Then a man entered. He didn't arrive with confidence or noise. He walked slowly as if he didn't want to disturb anyone. His clothes were old but clean. His shoes showed signs of long use. His posture was slightly bent, not from age, but from a life that had clearly been heavy at times. He carried no bag, no instrument, nothing that would draw attention. At first, no one noticed him. He stood near the entrance for a moment, looking around, taking everything in. His eyes moved carefully across the room until they rested on the piano. Something changed in his expression. It wasn't excitement or pride. It was something quieter, something deeper. Like seeing an old friend after a very long time, he took a few steps closer, then stopped again. The piano area was open, but there were people nearby. Some were sitting on benches, scrolling through their phones. Others were standing and chatting. A security worker was not far away. The man hesitated. His hands slowly came together in front of him, fingers rubbing gently, as if calming himself. He waited. Minutes passed. People came and went. No one paid him any attention. He didn't seem to mind. He was patient, almost used to being invisible. Finally, he stepped closer to the piano. He didn't touch it. He just stood beside it, looking down at the keys. His eyes softened, and for a brief moment the noise around him seemed to disappear. His breathing slowed. It was clear this wasn't just an instrument to him. Then, in a quiet and respectful voice, he spoke. "Can I play piano here?" The question was simple, polite, almost unsure, but the room reacted immediately. A few people turned their heads, surprised that someone had spoken out loud. Some looked at the man, then at each other. A short laugh came from somewhere in the crowd. Another person smiled, thinking it was a joke. Someone whispered, "Did he really just ask that?" Another voice followed, louder this time. "Does he even know how to play?" A few people laughed openly now. The man heard everything. He didn't look angry. He didn't argue. He just stood there, waiting for an answer. His face showed calm, but also a hint of nervousness, like he already expected rejection. One person nearby shook their head and said quietly, "This isn't a place for that." Another added, "People come here to relax, not to hear random noise." Someone else took out their phone, already smiling, clearly expecting something embarrassing to happen. The security worker looked over, unsure what to do. He studied the man for a moment, then the piano, then the small crowd forming. The man met his eyes, not with challenge, but with respect. "I'll be quick," the man said softly. "If it's not okay, I'll stop." There was something about the way he spoke. No ego. No demand, just a request. The security worker hesitated. He could have easily said no. That would have been the end of it. But something made him pause. Maybe it was the man's calm nature. Maybe it was the way he asked, not like someone trying to prove something, but like someone asking permission to breathe. "All right," the worker finally said. "Just one song." The reaction was immediate. Some people laughed louder now. A few exchanged looks like they had just been given free entertainment. Someone muttered, "This should be interesting." The man nodded gently. "Thank you." He walked to the bench and sat down slowly. The bench creaked slightly under his weight. He adjusted his position, making sure he was comfortable. His movements were careful, almost respectful, like he understood the value of what sat in front of him. He placed his hands on his lap and closed his eyes for a moment. The crowd waited. Some people folded their arms. Some lifted their phones higher. A few leaned in, already smiling, ready to capture a moment they thought would be funny. No one expected music. They expected mistakes. The man opened his eyes and looked at the keys. Up close, his hands told a story. They were rough, calloused. These were hands that had worked hard, Not hands people usually associate with art. A few fingers had small scars. Nails were short and clean but worn. Someone whispered, "Those don't look like piano hands." He didn't respond. He lifted his hands slowly and held them above the keys. He didn't rush. He didn't show off. He just waited, like he was listening to something only he could hear. The room felt different now. Not quieter, but more focused. People stopped walking as much. Conversations faded into low murmurs. Still, doubt filled the air. "He's going to mess it up." Someone said. Another replied, "This will be over in seconds." The man took one final breath, and then his fingers moved. The first note hadn't been played yet, but something had already changed. The laughter had softened. The phone stopped moving for a second. It was as if everyone suddenly realized this wasn't a joke to him. His fingers hovered, steady and sure. Right before the sound filled the room, there was silence, and in that silence, the man finally pressed the first key. The first note echoed softly through the hall. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was clean and steady. The sound traveled farther than people expected, cutting through the noise of the place like a calm voice asking everyone to listen. A few people smiled, thinking, "That's it." Others waited for the mistake they were sure would come next. Then the second note followed, then a third. Slowly, the music began to form a shape. The man didn't rush. His fingers moved gently, like they knew exactly where to go. The sound wasn't random. It wasn't messy. It was controlled, careful, and full of feeling. The simple tune started to grow, one note at a time. Some people lowered their phones a little. Few stopped smiling. The laughter that had filled the room earlier faded into silence. Conversations broke off in the middle of sentences. People who were walking slowed down without realizing it. Even those who had no interest in music felt something pulling their attention. The man's face remained calm. His eyes were focused on the keys, but it felt like he was looking far beyond them. His shoulders relaxed as the music flowed. It was clear now this was not his first time playing. This was not luck. The tune became richer. The left hand moved with quiet strength, laying a steady foundation, while the right hand danced lightly across the keys. The sound filled the space in a way no one expected. It wasn't just noise. It was emotion. It carried sadness, hope, and warmth all at once. Someone near the back whispered, "Wait, he's actually good." Another person replied softly, "No, he's more than good." A woman who had been scrolling on her phone slowly looked up. Her fingers stopped moving. She stared at the man, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to understand what she was hearing. A man nearby removed one earbud, then the other. The music continued to grow. The man leaned in slightly, his body moving with the rhythm. It wasn't a performance meant to impress. It felt personal, almost private, like he was playing for himself, and the crowd just happened to be there. Each note landed with purpose. People began to feel things they didn't expect. One person felt a tightness in their chest. Another felt memories rise without warning, old moments, old faces, old feelings they thought were forgotten. The music didn't shout. It spoke quietly, and somehow that made it stronger. The phones that had been raised for fun now stayed still, recording without jokes or comments. No one laughed anymore. No one mocked him now. The man's fingers moved faster, then slower, guiding the room through changes in mood. The sound softened and swelled again like waves coming in and out. It was balanced, confident, honest. The security worker stood frozen where he was. His arms dropped to his sides. He had allowed the man to play without much thought, but now he felt something close to awe. He glanced around and saw the same expression on many faces. People were listening, really listening. A child tugged at an adult's hand and whispered, "Why does this sound so sad?" The adult didn't answer. They didn't have one. The man at the piano closed his eyes again, just for a moment, as his hands continued moving. It felt like the world around him had disappeared. There was only the music now, only the story it was telling. The tune shifted. It became brighter, lighter, as if hope was slowly entering the room. The earlier sadness didn't vanish, but it softened, turning into something gentle and warm. Some people smiled without realizing it. Others swallowed hard, their throats tight with emotion. A person near the front wiped their eyes quickly, hoping no one noticed. The music didn't demand attention. It earned it. The man's breathing stayed steady. He wasn't showing off, not slamming the keys or exaggerating movements. Every motion was controlled. Every sound mattered. It was the kind of playing that came from years of practice and a lifetime of feeling. Someone whispered, "How did we judge him so fast?" Another replied, "We didn't even give him a chance." The room felt different now. The same walls. The same piano. The same people. But something had shifted. The space felt warmer. More human. As the music reached a deeper part, the man pressed the keys with a little more strength. The sound grew fuller, stronger, but never harsh. It felt like a voice rising, finally being heard after a long time. The crowd leaned in without realizing it. A few people closed their eyes, letting the music carry them. Others watched his hands closely, amazed by how easily they moved, how naturally they seemed to belong there despite their rough appearance. Earlier, those hands had been judged. Now they were respected. The tune slowed again. The man softened his touch, letting the notes fade gently into the air. Each sound lingered just long enough to be felt. No one spoke. No one moved. Even breathing seemed louder than before. The last few notes of this section came quietly, like a whisper. The man didn't stop playing yet. He allowed a short pause, letting the silence sit. It wasn't an ending. It was a breath. A moment to feel everything that had already been shared. The pause felt heavy and beautiful at the same time. People waited. Not because they were curious anymore, but because they didn't want to break the moment. The man opened his eyes slowly. His fingers hovered above the keys again. There was no fear now. No doubt. Only focus. Before continuing, he glanced up briefly. For the first time, he saw the crowd truly looking at him. Not with laughter. Not with judgment. But with respect. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply returned his gaze to the piano. And then he began the next part of the piece. The music flowed again, deeper than before, carrying everything that had already been felt and turning it into something unforgettable. The music now filled the hall completely. Each note seemed to float in the air, carrying a weight and beauty that no one had expected. What had started as curiosity, mixed with mockery, had now transformed into attention, awe, and a quiet sense of wonder. The man at the piano continued, his hands moving effortlessly across the keys. Every movement was precise yet natural, as if the piano and he were speaking the same language. People who had been talking before now stopped. Phones that had been raised to record a joke were lowered. Even the most skeptical faces in the crowd softened. They were no longer witnesses to an unusual moment. They were part of something bigger, something moving and real. The tune began to rise. It grew more complex, layering notes in ways that made the air vibrate. His left hand provided a strong, steady rhythm, while the right hand danced across the keys, weaving melodies that felt alive. There was a story in the music, a story of struggle, of hope, of quiet strength. It was subtle, but everyone in the room felt it. A woman near the back leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees. She had been scrolling on her phone when the man arrived, smiling at the thought of what was about to happen. Now, her eyes were wide with surprise and admiration. She watched his hands, noting the roughness of his fingers and the speed with which they moved. She realized that talent often comes in unexpected forms, and it had been right in front of her all along. A young man standing near the entrance had initially been snickering with his friends. Now he could not stop watching. He felt a strange mix of humility and embarrassment, having laughed at someone he had underestimated. Slowly, his arms dropped to his sides. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't whisper jokes to his friends. He just watched, completely absorbed. The music swelled further, and with each note, the room seemed to change. The harsh edges of the crowd's earlier judgment softened, replaced by a kind of reverent silence. The energy shifted. It was no longer about entertainment or spectacle. The sound had become a bridge, connecting everyone who was listening to the emotion that the man was pouring into the piano. Even the security worker, who had been standing nearby, straightened his posture. He had seen many performers in his years, but something about this was different. There was no pretense, no flashy showmanship. Just raw talent, combined with years of experience and a depth of feeling that could not be faked. The melody turned somber, slower now, more reflective. It carried a quiet sadness that touched something deep inside every listener. Some people felt memories stir, moments from their own lives that had been forgotten or set aside. They realized that music had the power to speak where words could not. A small child tugged on a parent's sleeve, looking up at the pianist with wide eyes. "Why does it sound like he's telling a story?" The child whispered. The parent didn't answer immediately. They couldn't. The question felt right. The music was indeed telling a story not written in words, but in the rise and fall of every note. The child nodded slowly, absorbing the emotion even without fully understanding it. As the piece continued, the complexity of the music increased. The right hand began to move faster, playing intricate patterns, while the left hand provided a grounding force. The two hands worked together perfectly, creating a rich tapestry of sound. It was impressive, not just technically, but emotionally. Every key pressed, every pause, every subtle change in rhythm carried meaning. Someone whispered, almost to themselves, "It's like he's alive inside the music." Others nodded quietly. Some had tears welling up in their eyes, though they quickly looked away, embarrassed. The power of the performance was not about showmanship. It was about truth. It revealed the man behind the hands, the life he had lived, and the depth of feeling he carried. The crowd's mood shifted completely. Earlier they had judged him based on appearance. They had expected a failure, a joke. Now judgment had been replaced by respect, awe, and an almost reverent silence. The people who had mocked him before were learning a lesson they would not forget. Talent, passion, and dedication cannot be measured by looks. The music swelled again, this time more hopeful. Notes lifted, danced, and soared. It was as if the man was telling the audience that hardship could be overcome, that beauty could emerge from struggle, and that patience and persistence could create something unforgettable. A young woman near the front pressed her hands together quietly, eyes closed. She could feel her heart beating faster with the rhythm, matching the rise and fall of the music. Around her, other listeners were equally captivated. Everyone felt connected not just to the man and the piano, but to the shared experience of witnessing something extraordinary. The pianist did not rush to show off. He played with intention, letting each note linger just long enough to be felt. The silence between notes was as important as the sound itself. The music seemed to breathe, and with each breath, the listeners felt drawn further in. Someone muttered under their breath, "I never expected this." Not from him. Another added, "Neither did I." "But it's beautiful." The room remained quiet, but the energy was palpable. Hearts were pounding, minds were racing, and emotions were running high. It was not a performance to be judged, but an experience to be felt. As the music approached its peak, the intensity increased. The man's hands moved faster now, yet every movement was controlled. Every note had a purpose. Every pause had meaning. The piece was building toward something larger than just sound. It was building toward an emotional climax that would leave no one unmoved. People in the crowd began to lean in, drawn closer to the music as if they could physically reach out and touch the feeling it carried. Eyes widened, breaths caught, and some people held on to nearby benches to steady themselves. The beauty of the sound, combined with the humanity of the performer, created a rare and unforgettable experience. The pianist's fingers danced across the keys, producing intricate patterns that seemed impossible at first glance. Yet it was effortless. It was as if his hands were not separate from his mind, but extensions of it, translating every thought and feeling directly into sound. The audience could sense it. They didn't need to understand music theory or technique. They could feel the story. They could feel the man's journey, his struggles, his patience, and his mastery. The room was no longer a public space filled with people passing time. It had become a place of shared emotion and deep human connection. And then, As the music began to settle into a gentle rhythm once more, the crowd realized something important. They had all underestimated him. They had mocked him. They had expected nothing, and yet here he was, creating something magnificent. It was a moment of humility for them, a reminder not to judge by appearances or first impressions. The music now softened, moving from the grand and sweeping to the intimate and personal. Each note felt like a word, each chord a sentence, telling a story that everyone in the room understood in their own way. It was moving, human, and unforgettable. The man's eyes were closed again. His face showed concentration, but also a peacefulness that was hard to describe. He was not playing for recognition or applause. He was playing because this was who he was and this was what he needed to do. The room listened, fully absorbed. The earlier laughter, the whispers, and the skepticism were gone. Only the music remained. Only the feeling it carried. Only the story it told. No one spoke. No one moved. Everyone simply listened, letting the notes wash over them, letting the story unfold. It was a quiet miracle of the moment, a simple man at a piano, showing the world that talent, patience, and emotion can break through even the hardest judgments. By the end of this part of the performance, it was clear this was no ordinary musician. This was someone who had lived, learned, struggled, and poured all of that into his art. And the people who had once doubted him now felt something they would never forget: true respect for the power of music, and for the man who had reminded them not to judge too quickly. The music now reached a point where it could not be ignored. The sound filled every corner of the hall, wrapping around the audience like a warm embrace. What had started as a few curious glances had grown into complete attention. Every ear was listening, every mind focused, every heart feeling the emotion flowing from the piano. The man at the piano was no longer just a figure in the room. He had become the center of a shared experience that touched everyone present. The notes grew stronger and deeper, carrying a kind of weight that demanded recognition. The rhythm built steadily, but it was not rushed. Each chord, each delicate touch of the keys had meaning. The audience could feel it. Some leaned forward, unable to help themselves, as if wanting to get closer to the source of the music. Others closed their eyes, letting the sound fill them completely. The hall was silent except for the piano, yet it was filled with emotion. Those who had mocked him at the beginning could no longer find humor in the situation. The young man who had laughed the loudest now looked embarrassed. His friends lowered their heads, suddenly aware of how wrong they had been. It was a lesson in humility unfolding before their eyes. The man had said nothing, yet his music spoke louder than any words ever could. The crowd began to notice details they had missed earlier. His hands, rough and scarred, moved gracefully across the keys. His fingers, long in practice, seemed to glide over the notes effortlessly. There was no wasted movement, no showiness, no unnecessary flourish, just pure skill and a deep understanding of the instrument. Every note, every pause, every touch felt intentional. As if the piano and the man were one, the music shifted, moving from a quiet, reflective section to a more uplifting melody. The change brought a sense of hope to the room, a reminder that beauty and light could emerge even after struggle. People felt a gentle lift in their spirits. Shoulders relaxed, faces softened, and eyes that had been skeptical now shone with awe. It was impossible not to be moved. A woman in the back, who had been scrolling on her phone before the man began playing, now stood still, her phone forgotten. She watched him with rapt attention. There was a subtle smile on her face, a mix of surprise and admiration. She whispered to the person beside her, "I didn't expect this. He's incredible." Others felt similar emotions. A few people wiped tears from their eyes quietly, not wanting to be noticed. The music had a strange, silent power, soft but unyielding. It made people stop judging, stop thinking about their day, stop worrying about the outside world. For these few minutes, nothing mattered except the notes, the story they told. And the man who played them, the pianist, leaned into a particularly expressive passage. His body moved slightly with the rhythm, his fingers flying yet controlled. The notes seemed to speak directly to the hearts of the listeners. Some felt memories return, moments of joy, sadness, love, or loss. Others felt emotions they could not name, but they knew they were being touched deeply. The crescendo approached. The music swelled, and the hall seemed to vibrate with every chord. The earlier laughter and chatter were completely gone. Even those who had doubted him, who had expected a joke, were now silent. They watched as the man's skill and emotion unfolded. Every motion, every touch of the keys demanded respect. It was impossible to look away. Then the climax arrived. The notes became more forceful, yet never harsh. The melody reached heights that made the hair on people's arms stand on end. Some gasped softly. Others held their breath. The music was powerful, but it was also tender. It carried both strength and vulnerability, a combination that few could resist. The man's eyes closed again, as if to feel the music rather than just play it. The intensity of his performance was matched by the quiet dignity with which he conducted himself. He did not seek applause. He did not glance at the crowd. He played because this was what he was meant to do. The audience could feel that authenticity. It made every note matter even more. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime and yet only a few minutes, the music began to soften. The crescendo faded into a gentle, soothing rhythm. The atmosphere shifted from excitement and intensity to peace and reflection. The man allowed each note to linger, stretching the sound so it could be fully felt. The room seemed to exhale along with him. The last note hung in the air. Silence followed. It was not an awkward silence. It was a silence filled with appreciation, awe, and respect. Everyone in the room had been transformed in some way. The people who had mocked him now faced their own humility. They realized that judging someone before truly seeing them had been a mistake. The applause began slowly, hesitant at first. Then it grew, building into a steady wave of appreciation. People clapped, some stood, some whistled quietly. The man acknowledged it with a small nod, but he did not linger in it. He had shared his gift, and that was enough. The moment belonged to everyone, but he had given them something they would carry long after leaving the hall. A few people approached him, asking questions. They wanted to know who he was, how he had learned to play, and why he hadn't been discovered sooner. He answered humbly, speaking softly and with kindness. He did not boast. He did not seek fame. He simply shared a little of his story, enough to remind everyone that great talent often goes unnoticed until the right moment. The security worker, once skeptical, now looked at him with respect. He had allowed the man to play without much thought, but witnessing the performance changed him. He understood that the world often misjudges people based on appearances. But true skill and heart cannot be hidden forever. The crowd began to disperse slowly, some lingering to reflect, others moving on but carrying the memory with them. The man packed his hands together briefly and stood. He walked away quietly, leaving the piano behind, but the impact of his music remained. Everyone who had been present felt it, the story told without words, the emotion shared without explanation, the lesson taught without a lecture. As people left, many looked back at the piano, some with new appreciation. The room seemed different now. It had been touched by something real and human. A simple request to play, once mocked, had become a moment of connection, respect, and shared emotion. People would remember it not for the laughter that had greeted him at first, but for the masterpiece that followed. The story of the quiet man at the piano became a lesson for everyone in that hall. Appearances can be deceiving. First impressions can be wrong, and sometimes extraordinary beauty comes from the most unexpected places. The applause faded, the crowd left, but the memory of that music, and the man who played it, stayed with them. It was a moment that no one had expected, yet it changed everything. The piano remained in the center of the hall, polished and waiting, but it no longer felt like furniture. It had become a symbol of patience, humility, and the power of talent. And the man, though gone, had left behind a quiet, unforgettable lesson. Never underestimate someone who asks politely, "Can I play here?" The man stepped away from the piano slowly, his hands brushing lightly over the polished surface one last time. He did not look for praise or attention. He did not linger to bask in the applause that still echoed softly through the hall. His eyes were calm, his posture relaxed, but there was a quiet satisfaction in the way he carried himself. He had shared something important, and that was enough for him. People in the crowd were still recovering from what they had just experienced. Some leaned against benches, hands over their mouths, trying to comprehend how someone they had judged so quickly could create something so beautiful. Others walked slowly, not ready to leave the space, as if leaving would somehow erase what they had just witnessed. The music had shifted something in them, and they knew it. A few people approached him, their curiosity mixed with admiration. One asked, "How long have you been playing?" He smiled softly, his eyes not meeting theirs directly, and replied simply, "For as long as I can remember." Another asked, "Why did you come here today?" His answer was calm, humble, and brief. "I just wanted to play." There was no boast, no story of fame or fortune, only a simple truth. The crowd began to disperse slowly. But the impact of the performance stayed behind. People whispered to each other, talking about the beauty of the music and the humility of the man. Many admitted quietly to themselves that they had been wrong to judge him at first. The laughter, the mockery, they realized now it had all been misplaced. Talent, patience, and dedication cannot be measured by appearances. And they had learned this lesson in the most unexpected way. The security worker, who had reluctantly allowed him to play at first, now watched with awe as the man moved toward the exit. He shook his head slightly, muttering under his breath, "I'll never judge someone like that again." His earlier skepticism had vanished completely, replaced by respect and a quiet admiration for the skill, discipline, and emotion the man had shared. Even the young people who had mocked him before now seemed different. They stood quietly, heads bowed, as if trying to absorb the lesson without words. One whispered to a friend, "I can't believe I laughed at him." That was incredible. The friend nodded, unable to find words. The performance had touched them in a way that went beyond entertainment. It had stirred their emotions, made them think, and reminded them that appearances often deceive. The man walked through the hall, moving calmly among the lingering crowd. He did not hurry, yet he did not seek attention. He had given them a gift, but he did not claim ownership over it. The piano remained behind, a silent witness to the transformation that had taken place in the room. People looked at it differently now. It was no longer just an instrument. It was a symbol of patience, artistry, and the unexpected ways in which talent can reveal itself. A few people quietly followed him, wanting to ask more questions or simply to thank him, but he offered only small nods and polite smiles. There was a humility about him that was impossible to ignore. He did not speak much. He did not explain himself. He simply let the music speak for him, and it had said more than any words could. Outside, the world continued as usual. People hurried along streets, buses rumbled, and life moved forward. But for those who had been in the hall, something had changed. They carried with them the memory of the music, the precision of the hands that had played it, and the quiet dignity of the man who had made them listen, feel, and reconsider their judgments. It was a lesson that would not fade quickly. Some people reflected silently as they left the hall. They thought about their own assumptions, the times they had judged someone too quickly, and the moments they had missed because they had been distracted or dismissive. The music had reminded them that every person has value, every life has stories, and every talent deserves a chance to be seen. A child who had been tugging at a parent's hand earlier now looked back at the piano with wide eyes. "Will he come back?" the child asked. The parent smiled, unsure, but the child's question held hope. Even the youngest in the room had been touched by the performance, reminded that beauty and talent are everywhere. Often in places where no one expects to find them, the man disappeared into the crowd, blending into the world as quietly as he had entered it. No one shouted after him. No one called his name. He did not need recognition. The music he had left behind was enough. And that music, the lesson of patience, humility, and unexpected talent, lingered long after he had gone. People in the hall slowly returned to their own lives, but the experience stayed with them. They remembered the hands moving over the keys, the gentle rise and fall of the melody, The way the room had seemed to pause as every note rang out. They realized that they had been part of something rare, a moment of true connection, of art speaking directly to the human heart. Even the security worker paused before leaving, glancing back at the piano. He thought about how easily people judge others, how often they expect failure from someone who looks different or acts quietly. And he made a silent promise to himself. Never again would he underestimate someone because of appearances. The hall slowly emptied. The piano sat silently, polished and ready, but the echoes of the performance still hung in the air. It was more than music. It was a reminder, a lesson, and a story that no one present would ever forget. It had begun with a simple question: "Can I play piano here?" A question that had been met with laughter and doubt, but had ended with awe, respect, and a shared moment of human connection. In the end, the man had reminded everyone of something important. Greatness is not always obvious. Talent does not always come with loud introductions or flashy appearances. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is humble. Sometimes it arrives when people least expect it, and yet leaves an impact that lasts forever. People left the hall changed, even if they didn't say it out loud. They carried with them a story, a memory, and a lesson about patience, humility, and the true nature of talent. And for the man, who had asked only for permission to play, the world had witnessed something extraordinary without him needing to announce it. The masterpiece had spoken for itself, and as the hall emptied and the sunlight faded across the polished piano, the quiet truth remained: every person has a story. Every talent has a voice, and sometimes all it takes is one chance for the world to see what has always been there.